Hey everyone, Cell here with a quick overview as to what I currently plan on doing for the Legacy of Phrecia event. Looking around all the classes, I was originally planning on looking for something that was unique and couldn't be done outside of the base game, or couldn't be done with the base game things, I guess. Nothing really piqued my interest, and I was planning on, before they announced the event, leveling a new character in Settlers League with my Mage Blood and all this other runecrafted stuff and Recombinator items to play Toxigrain. Well, Bog Shaman was revealed, and I said that looks really good for Toxigrain. So I have been leaning towards that, and I think that is what I'm going to end up playing. I will post the POB down below as well. It's going to be pretty rough because it's mostly for me. I'm not calling this a guide or anything. Just wanted to open the discussion and point out a couple things I think that will be pretty interesting if you are building into Bog Shaman or Bog Witch as a Toxic Rain character or as really any other type of character, because there is one point that I think is being not extremely overlooked necessarily, because it's hard to necessarily make work with other things in the class, but there is an element that I thought fit in pretty nicely. So I don't have it on screen at the moment. Let me see if I can get that. Okay, that should do. So this is Bog Shaman, which most people are calling Bog Witch because it sounds cooler. I think they just didn't call it that because the base class is called Witch, but I digress. So, looking at the options for Toxic Rain, or why I'm choosing Bog Shaman for Toxic Rain. First of all, Toad Pact, 50% skill effect duration. That is huge for Toxic Rain, especially now that quality scales the base duration. Duration is just an effective damage multiplier for Toxic Rain because of the pod stacking that happens. The AoE is kind of a downside, kind of an upside, depending on who you are and how you look at it. So typically in a Toxic Rain build, people try to get between 37 and 43% AoE, which hits a breakpoint where your pod radius is, I think, 2.1 meters, and the secondary spread that the pods can fall within once you fire off the skill is 2.4 meters in radius. So that means the dead zone in the middle, where it's possible nothing hits, is 0.3 meters. So anything bigger than that is going to get hit by all 5 pods. Outside of that, it's fairly safe to assume 4 pods as far as I'm aware of and familiar with the skill. So there's 2 options you can do here as far as the area scaling goes. The first is try to reduce it to effectively being that same 37 to 43% range. And the next thing is crank it up even further to try to get a better or hit a different breakpoint, and that would be a total of 94 to 95% AoE. The dead zone goes from 0.3 meters to 0.4, but I'm of the opinion it shouldn't be a huge deal, and if it is, I can pivot. It's very easy to switch between these setups, and I'll get into that more when we go back to POB. But I plan on going up to the 94-95% range first, seeing how that goes. I might even crank the area of effect even further and see how that goes, and if all else fails, I will use Concentrated Effect with a total of 100% increased AoE to get the pods and the secondary radius down to a more normal level. So, minus 20 LE res is pretty significant. I'll be taking a Lyra because of that. Projectile speed, I believe, impacts how quickly the pods fall as well. Similar to other like ground targeted arrow skills. Should be fairly nice though. Also helps with your Mana Forge setups, whatever you end up doing with that. Then onto Pandemic. Cruel Lab pickup, 40% more damage over time. Obviously quite high. These two things together should be close to 80% more effective damage, which is a lot to get from a class. Now, obviously, these come with downsides, which is why the numbers are so cranked. 40% more damage. The only other thing like that in the base game is on Berserker, which makes you take 10% increased damage. Losing 5% life per second if you've been hit recently is a lot more manageable. More on that in a second. Everything else here is kind of okay. Venom Drinker, there's a case for it, and it may be something I end up experimenting with. Fel Fen, similar deal. Obviously, if you want to go positive Chaos Res, you can't use this, otherwise that's not a possibility. And I really enjoy a particular defensive setup, which I will again show in the POB, so I can't take that, even though it would have good damage implications by setting Chaos Res for enemies to 0. Then, Sanguine Power is also interesting because, especially with Recombinators, with the league being, or the event being parented in Settlers League, you can make some really high energy shield equipment for basically nothing in solo self-found even. The absolute bare minimum ES you can get based on my testing, and this is with hybrid evasion ES body armor and the rest of the gear being pure ES, was like 1250, somewhat conservatively. So yeah, you can get a lot of energy shield, and that's just alt spam for one mod, Regal, craft percentage defenses on it. So there's a lot of potential life to be gained there. But then you're playing a game of fighting incoming damage with a raw health pool instead of trying to mitigate it, which is generally not super preferable if you aren't also scaling some other form of defense or offense with that life total, which you'll see a lot of those doing this league or in the event. Eerie Silence is kind of okay. A lot worse in this build though, because we're going to be leveraging Wither, and that stacks additively with the enemies pacified by you take increased damage. So it would effectively be 15% more damage in the end, or 15 to 18% I should say, which is decent. Nothing to scoff at there. Your curse providing 15% more damage. Except it is indeed a curse, and that will prevent you from using other curses, and curses are really good. If I got an anathema or something, I would entertain that thought a little more, but since I can't plan on that because it's pretty rare, I'm not going to do that. So I'm avoiding it in this build. So I'll be taking Vile Imprecations, the middle node here, splitting off into these two nodes, and using an Enfeeble Blasphemy setup. And the reason for doing that is I'll be evasion based, and the reservation efficiency is good enough, and I'm going to want to be close to things, relatively speaking anyways, for the Malediction. Again, getting 10% reduced damage dealt from enemies. Then I kept puzzling over, okay, I've got a fourth point, what am I going to take? Am I going to take Sanguine Power or Venom Drinker or Fel Fen for a little bit before I switch to my main setup? And I'm like, I want to use a unique body armor, so I'm not going to go with Sanguine Power, I don't think. Fel Fen, again. I like Divine Flesh, so I'm not going to use that. Venom Drinker, I don't hugely enjoy max res as a defensive layer myself, so I'm like, okay, what's going on here? And then I wanted to look into some other setups, and I think I can switch back to POB at this point in order to say that I, again, wanted to use Divine Flesh. Anything that penetrates elemental resistances, Divine Flesh is ridiculously good against, so Uber bosses, especially, pinnacles even, to a lesser extent. The non-Uber versions, that is. So, yeah, Divine Flesh, even without penetration, it's an effective 2.5% max Ellie res, which is still pretty solid on top of max gas res. And I wanted to use Doppelganger Guise for between 30 and 40% less physical and chaos damage taken. This is less damage of all types taken with Divine Flesh, effectively, because I'm converting half of my damage to elemental, or half my elemental damage taken to chaos, and that does affect damage over time. This means that the mod is essentially applying to all damage taken, just to a very varying degrees, physical and chaos more so, elemental damage less so. And I figured regenerating life, whenever you get hit, is pretty good as well. 10% life regen is a lot. So how do I actively get hit? I'm an evasion-based build. Well, the class has a thing for that. I'm going to leverage Rotten Core. Your skills deal you 100% of mana spent on upfront skill mana costs as physical damage. So my skill costs over here 18 mana. Getting hit for 18 mana is essentially nothing. And that will constantly trigger my 1%, or my 10% rather, life regen. You don't have to be hit by enemies for this, so self-hits do work. And again, the damage is inconsequential, even though it is going to get reduced by Doppelganger Guise itself because it's physical damage. And that opens up other possibilities for self-hit setups. If I switch over to Moku's here, look at my combined DPS. Again, I'll have this down below. It's mostly for me though. I just wanted to talk about the self-hit kind of setup. 600,000 combined DPS. If I put on Moku's and I check that I'm ignited, because I will always be ignited. Oh, I took them out. I guess I can do this now. I wanted to showcase attack speed all the way down. Throw those on. Because Moku's gives you a chance to be ignited. I'll have a 50% chance whenever I use a skill, if I take fire damage from it, to be ignited. This is chaos damage here, or fizz taken is chaos here. This would be fizz taken as fire instead. Equally easy to get, if not a little more so. I don't remember the weightings exactly. Essentially, you'll be ignited 100% of the time. So you put on 2 Moku's, you have an absolute minimum 50% increased attack speed, which would take me from 600k to 805k. Okay, so that's absolute minimum roll on both these rings, and these are dirt cheap. If you're in Trade League, these will not cost you literally anything at all. But that's 25% attack speed each. Goes up to 48 if it's max rolled and catalyzed. So 600 base, I was at 805 with the other set. This would take me to 995. Again, about double the amount of attack speed. So yeah, that's about 66% more damage, more DPS, based on mostly my lack of attack speed. It wouldn't be that significant with actual gear, because you would get more attack speed from your quiver, and other things, and other damage scaling vectors going on there. But the point is, 2 ring slots, 96% attack speed. You don't necessarily have to use both either. If you only want 48% attack speed instead of 96, use one of the rings instead of both of them. You could also self-chill. I don't know that that's going to be significant enough of a chill to be worthwhile. And I'm not going to try to make it work either, because I can't guarantee I'll get the rings in a solo self-found environment. Because even if I do uber bossing I've had streaks where I didn't get Winterweave for quite a while. So I'm just not going to count on that. Moku's, on the other hand, is relatively common and could work its way into my setup. So, other things of note here. So not only am I going to get the net 5% regen from the Ascendancy, losing me 5% per second, but Doppelganger Guys giving me 10%. Also speccing into life gain on hit. If I get a Watcher's Eye with Vitality, I'm going to use that as well. I'm dipping a little bit into accuracy over here, mostly for the attack speed, but being able to hit more is nice, even though it's not required to deal damage with the build. Because, again, life gain on hit is very powerful, especially when you have a high hit rate skill. Toxic Rain can hit multiple times per arrow, because there's a hit that's dealt initially, and then when the pods go off at the end of their duration, that's another hit. And then you have Mana Forge setups of Frenzy, and then I'll be using Toxic Rain of Withering, or a high hitting like Storm Rain or Rain of Arrows of Saturation, something like that, with Withering Touch to apply my Wither stacks, which is currently set up to a conservative 7 here, based solely on the Toxic Rain of Withering duration. Obviously, if I could pump that to 15, looking at 750k DPS, again, with absolutely no gear. A +3 bow with crafted attack speed will be very easy to acquire in Solo Self-Found. The Doppelganger Guys setup with Divine Flesh obviously isn't strictly necessary at the beginning. That's mostly there for me to have a goal to work towards while I'm progressing with the build. Just because I like having a clear-cut goal for what to do with the build instead of, okay, I got my Void Stones, now what? The Guys is relatively easy to get in Solo Self-Found as well if you're experienced or play as much as I'm probably going to. It is about a 1 in 12 from the Maven, if I recall correctly. It used to be 1 in 50, but it got buffed in Necropolis League, I believe. Yeah, I think that's about it. If you look at the POB at all, just know that, again, I made it for myself. It's going to be a lot of adjustment. I'm going to be switching between various things, like I might pick up this node over here. This will be a jewel with corrupted area of effect implicit at some point. I may take different masteries depending on the situation. I may go Eldritch Battery if mana is a huge issue. Otherwise, I would just stay on mana, or maybe life tap a couple of things as well. Oh, I guess one other point here. I need to fit in more duration support as well somehow, but I'm going to be running an Immortal Call on automation. This should have 40 to 50% uptime, which is going to be really solid, especially if I can get the strength to level it up, which I may end up doing. Well, I can't use a Lethal Pride, I guess, so maybe I pick up a strength node or two, or pick up the practical applications here for some res help as well. I do have the 200 all res in the config just because I didn't want to make gear. I'm just going to figure that out as I go. And again, you don't need chaos res in the beginning anyways. My aura setup is terrible too. I'm using Purity of Elements, which might be a mainstay depending on how difficult it is to cap res, but Grace and Blasphemy and Feeble are going to be staying for a while. I may end up dropping the Blasphemy setup if it doesn't feel that good, but I suspect it'll feel fine. Get the 10% reduced damage taken from, or reduced enemy damage dealt, slight differences, from the Malediction, which I am not sure is applied here. Yeah, I don't really know. Haven't looked at that, but again, this is kind of what I'm thinking for the event. Wanted to post a video, even if it is super low effort, not going to make a thumbnail or anything. And I may end up making some videos on settler stuff I get up to because I've been having a PoE itch since we haven't had a new league since July. So I will see you in future videos, and good luck in the event, everyone. Peace.